Welcome to LC Screen Talk. My name is Larry, and today I am sharing my top 5 best and top 5 worst horror films. To get into the Halloween spirit, I am collaborating with fellow YouTuber Reece's Reviews on our favorite and least favorite horror films. Reece is a wonderful YouTuber, so make sure you go ahead, check out his reviews. He's really well spoken, really intelligent, and really articulate. So make sure you head on over, watch his top 5 favorites and least favorite horror films, and maybe click that subscribe button while you're there. Now, if you follow my channel, you know personally, I love the horror genre. No matter if the film ends up being horrible or amazing, I get excited for nearly all scary movies that hit the theater. And that's why making both of these lists was very difficult, because I have seen a lot of horror films, and there are so many greats that I absolutely love. There are classics, there are moderns that are so good and high quality. But I've also seen a ton of really bad horror films. So narrowing down both categories to only 5 was crazy difficult. So before I jump into my official lists, let's go ahead and talk about the honorable mentions that just missed out. So honorable mentions for the worst horror of all time, I have the 1998 remake of Psycho. This missed out on the list because it mostly falls under the category of completely unnecessary and completely pointless. Why shot for shot, word for word, remake a film and then do it this poorly? It makes no sense that the film was this bad, and it was literally remaking the original. Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. I know this has kind of a cult following. I think it's a very poorly done film in general, but why is this a Halloween film without Michael Myers even in it? Plus, the story is super convoluted. There are some redeeming factors that keep it off of the list, but overall, it's probably my least favorite of the entire Halloween franchise. And my final honorable mention goes to pretty much an entire series, and that is the Paranormal Activity series. The first one was fine enough, but then after that they just nosedived off a cliff for me. I was never scared or intrigued really with this premise or with the films themselves, so I know, especially that first one does it for a lot of people, doesn't do it for me. As for honorable mentions on my favorites list, my first honorable mention goes to Halloween. Pretty much the slasher film that started the slasher film craze and that has lasted the test of time. But Michael Myers is an icon, the film series is an icon. As an actual film, it's executed really well. Texas Chainsaw Massacre is one of the most brutal early horror films. I mean, it is just savage. Plus, Leatherface is horrifying. It is super scary and crazy. I love the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And my final honorable mention goes to probably my favorite, more recent modern horror film, and that is The Conjuring. It executed building tension so well, and it had so many great sequences in it. I think it's definitely the best horror to come out in the past 10 years, and that's saying a lot, because I did like things like Insidious and Sinister, so this one's up there. So now, on to number 5 on my worst horror films list. The remake for The Wicker Man is such a hot mess. It barely beat out the remake for Psycho. And the reason is because they made these changes that just didn't work. The original is a solid film. It's not a classic film like Psycho is. But then you just have Nicolas Cage at his most over-the-top, outrageous, overacting best/worst. And I say best because it made for some really comedic moments. Some really funny moments, even though they weren't intentional. And its ability to at least be fun and entertain to a point is why it doesn't make it much further up this list, but this is not a good movie. So number 5 for my favorite horror films is... So I'm rocking the shirt, rocking the Ghostface shirt. I love Scream. Scream was one of the first scary movies that I was able to actually watch as it came out, and I remember it. I remember watching it with my cousins when we would have like sleepovers, and I think it's just such a smart movie. It just lambasts all of the old tropes. It has such a knowledge and meta self-awareness of the horror genre, while in conjunction creating a really, really good slasher film. And slasher films are probably my favorite subgenre within horror. I always find it fun to have somebody actually coming after you, and this is one of the best. Now, some people actually praise the Human Centipede, and I just put the first one here, but I could probably put the full sequence. The only reason I'm not is because I never watched the second and third sequences, because I hated this first Human Centipede film. The initial concept is just so gross and disturbing, but not in like a good horror classic sense of being gross and disturbing. And this is one of those films of the 2000s that put grotesqueness and nastiness and shock over actual content, and that completely overshadowed any of the sub-commentary that Human Centipede was attempting to make, and instead it just came out as like this weird, nasty film that I did not like at all. It is those redeeming factors under the surface that keep it from being top 3 worst. I think The Nightmare on Elm Street is actually the scariest of the like Freddy, Jason, Michael Myers trio here. This original is such an awesome concept to make kids scared of going to sleep. Plus, Freddy Krueger was such a menacing, like creepy figure, and the movie is constructed really, really well. It's a really well done slasher film, and it's still one of my favorite slasher and horror films of all time. So I actually don't like the Blair Witch Project at all. That first film could have maybe made this list itself, because I think it's a terrible movie just in general. I think it's boring. I think it is just, ugh. I never understood all the hype and the craziness. I guess I kind of get that people thought it was real at the time, but I saw it in theaters as a kid, and I was bored and like, ugh, get me out of here. And it spawned the like found footage genre, so a lot of strikes against you there, Blair Witch. The only reason that film is not making this list is because they decided to make a sequel because it made a buttload of money. That was horrible. Just way worse than anything that first film did. Book of Shadows, Blair Witch 2 didn't reinvest any of that money they made from the first one because it looked horrible, it looked cheap. They like ditched the found footage genre, they made it about a film, but they still tried to like integrate the fact that, oh, all these crazy movie fans are heading out to these fields. But it's just so dumb. It's so poorly acted. It looks like crap. It's a bad movie. And any scares the first one had, this one has none. So I mentioned the remake in my honorable mentions for the worst horror of all time, but Psycho, the original, comes in at number 3 of my favorite horror films of all time. This was Hitchcock at his best. What a well-constructed, psychological, like, intense horror, slasher, thriller, all mixed into one. It's just such a great film that is pretty much perfectly executed, which in fact actually makes that remake even more frustrating because they literally copied a pretty much perfect game plan and ruined it. But this spawned some of the most iconic scenery of all time with the whole like shower scene, had some of the best horror scores of all time. I mean, it's a classic in every sense of the word and it deserves to be. Gonna be honest, I debated not even putting this on the list because I don't know why it's even classified as a horror at all. But Troll 2 is so bad. To start, they're goblins. There's not even any trolls in the film. It looks so outrageous and so ridiculous. And it's not actually a sequel to the Troll movie that came out a few years prior, which also wasn't good, but They literally just were like, let's like connect us to that one. Doesn't that sound like a good marketing tool? But it's laughable. It's so horrible. Again, it's not scary at all. This is a borderline straight up comedy. So I'm not sure why it even got that classification. But it's had like a documentary about it made from one of the child stars, calling it like the best worst movie of all time. And that's kind of what keeps it from taking over and being number one, is because it's just so outrageous and so ridiculous that there's a certain level of campy just buffoonery that keeps it from being able to be named like the worst horror film that's ever been made. And since then, it also has gotten this weird cult following who love this film for how bad it is, I'm hoping. But it is a terrible movie nonetheless. Whether it wanted to be horrible, whether it has embraced its horribleness, that doesn't excuse the fact that it is terrible and deserves to be at number 2. Fun story with The Poltergeist. This was like my first ever favorite movie. I was like 3 or 4 years old and I would watch this on loop. My parents actually didn't know I was watching it the first time. They actually thought I was sleeping, and I really wasn't sleeping when I was laying there just watching the movie. But I loved it. So I've seen this movie about 1,000,001 times. Regardless, this is yet another really well made, really well executed film. They're here. Still remains one of like the most iconic horror moments of all time. The whole cemetery plot is so good. The whole medium factor is amazing. So I love this film a lot for nostalgia reasons, but it also is kind of a cult classic for a reason, and one of the staples in the horror genre. Yes, Jaws the Revenge, or Jaws 4, is my worst horror film of all time. And a big part of that is it comes off of a franchise that started so strong. And then even Jaws 2 was a big step down from Jaws, but still alright. And then we got to Jaws 3, and it was like, oh my goodness. And then they thought it was okay to release this movie into theaters. And unlike something like Troll 2, this takes itself way serious, like too serious. And the script is a mess, the acting is like, ugh, poor Michael Caine, what were you thinking? It's no fun, it's like a slog to get through this plot. And then, to top it all off, the whole premise of the movie is literally that this shark is seeking revenge, like following them, seeking revenge. So if the first Jaws wasn't bad enough to like make people think, oh, sharks need to be killed, let's go ahead and make it seem like they are revenge-filled monsters. But there's just no fun to be had here. There are no scares to be had here. There are no thrills to be had here. So it's just like a frustratingly bad movie with pretty much no redeeming factors. So call me cliche, but I do think that The Exorcist is still the best horror movie of all time. It completely deserved all of the accolades it received. It deserved the nominations. Linda Blair deserved, having her career jump-started from this. Because its quality of filmmaking was just superb. And that starts with Linda Blair's amazing portrayal in this film. She is fantastic. And now as we watch back, clearly some of these effects are a little bit outdated. But thinking back to the 70s and them being able to accomplish like the stair crawl and some of the stuff that happens in that possession room, it's insane. And the turning of the head, all of these things were just outrageous and crazy and groundbreaking for their time. And then this movie has just kind of laid the groundwork for modern day, not just possession movies, but horror in general. The script is fantastic. I think the direction is really top notch. So overall, just as a really good film and one that really brought in some innovative horror elements, this is still the best one that has been released in my book. So, those are my lists for the 5 worst horror films ever released to theaters and the 5 best horror films ever released to theaters. What did you think of the movies I listed? And What do you think are the best and worst horror films of all time? Also, don't forget to check out Reese's videos and make sure you browse through some of his other videos. That channel link will be in the description down below. Also, make sure you hit that like button down below and subscribe if you're not already subscribed over here. I love you all so much for your support. Mwah! Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!